The dusty streets of Bismarck, North Dakota, had never seen a woman quite like Sophia Zimmerman, standing alone on the train platform in 1882, with nothing but a battered carpetbag and tear-stained cheeks that caught the afternoon sun. She had come west with promises whispered in her ear by a man who called himself her fiancé, only to find that Charles Whitmore had never intended to marry her at all, just needed a respectable cover for his gambling debts and shady business dealings, before he disappeared into the Montana Territory with another woman and whatever money he could steal. The conductor had taken pity on her, letting her ride as far as Bismarck when her ticket ran out, and now she stood in a town where she knew no one, had no money, and carried a secret that would soon become impossible to hide. Preston Gallagher had been mending fence posts on the northern edge of his cattle ranch when he decided to ride into town for supplies, his broad shoulders aching from a morning of hard work under the relentless Dakota sun. At 28 years old, he had built his ranch from nothing after the war, trading his cavalry saber for a lasso and his military discipline for the patient work of raising cattle in unforgiving territory. He was a quiet man by nature, more comfortable with horses than people, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to see more than he ever said aloud. The town folk respected him for his honesty and his willingness to help neighbors in need, though the unmarried women of Bismarck had long since given up trying to catch his attention at church socials and barn dances. When Preston rode his bay gelding down Main Street that September afternoon, he noticed the young woman immediately because she looked so out of place, wearing a traveling dress that had once been fine, but now showed the dust and wear of hard miles. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with rich auburn hair pinned up in a style that was coming loose, and she stood very still as though moving might shatter what little composure she had left. He watched as she approached the hotel, spoke briefly with the proprietor who shook his head firmly, and then walked slowly back toward the train platform with her shoulders hunched as though expecting a blow. Preston tied his horse outside the general store and went about his business, loading supplies into his saddlebags while trying not to think about the lost look in the woman's green eyes. He had learned long ago that everyone had their troubles, and a smart man minded his own affairs in a territory where asking too many questions could get you killed. But when he finished his shopping and saw her still sitting on that platform bench, staring at her hands folded in her lap with an expression of absolute despair, something in his chest twisted uncomfortably. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he came near. "Pardon me, miss. Are you waiting for someone?" She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red from crying, though she was making a valiant effort to compose herself. "No, sir. I am not waiting for anyone." Her voice was cultured, educated, with traces of an Eastern accent that marked her as far from home. "The next train does not come through until tomorrow evening," Preston said gently. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Her chin lifted with pride that must have cost her dearly. "I will manage, thank you for your concern." Preston shifted his weight, turning his hat in his hands. "The hotel owner is particular about payment in advance. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house on Elm Street that is more reasonable if you need lodging. I appreciate the information." She stood up, gripping her carpetbag tightly, and he realized she was trembling slightly. "If you will excuse me." She walked past him with as much dignity as she could muster, heading in the direction he had pointed, though he suspected she had no more ability to pay Mrs. Henderson than she did the hotel. Preston watched her go, warring with himself about what was proper and what his conscience demanded. A gentleman did not interfere in a lady's business uninvited, but neither did he stand by while someone clearly in distress struggled alone. He caught up with her halfway down the street. "Miss, I do not mean to presume, but if you find yourself in difficult circumstances, my ranch is about 5 miles north of town. My housekeeper, Mrs. O'Brien, could use help with cooking and cleaning if you are looking for work." She stopped walking and turned to face him, studying his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Why would you offer work to a stranger?" "Because you look like someone who has had bad luck but is trying to maintain her dignity," Preston said honestly. "And because I was taught that when you can help someone, you should." Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over despite her obvious effort to contain them. "I cannot accept charity from a stranger. It is not charity. Mrs. O'Brien is 65 years old and her arthritis is getting worse. She needs help, and I need someone who can cook something besides burnt stew and hard biscuits." He offered a slight smile. "You would be doing me a favor, honestly." She looked down at her worn boots, at the dusty street, at the carpet bag that held everything she owned in the world. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am not what you think I am. I am not respectable." Preston felt something crack open inside his carefully guarded heart at the shame in her voice. "I think you are a person who needs help. Everything else is your own business unless you choose to share it." She raised her eyes to his again, searching for judgment or ulterior motives, but apparently finding neither. "My name is Sophia Zimmerman. Preston Gallagher." He gestured toward where his horse was tied. "I have a few more supplies to collect, then we can ride out if you are willing. You can ride and I will walk alongside." "I can walk," Sophia said quickly. "I do not want to be any trouble. 5 miles is a long walk for someone who looks like they have already traveled far today." Preston's voice was firm but kind. "Wait here. I will only be a moment." He returned to the general store and purchased an additional blanket and some fabric that he thought might be suitable for a woman's dress, adding them to his supplies while trying not to think too hard about why he was going to such lengths for someone he had just met. The storekeeper, old Mr. Patterson, gave him a knowing look but said nothing, just wrapped the purchases and took Preston's money without comment. When he brought his horse around, Sophia was still standing where he had left her, looking uncertain and frightened and desperately hopeful all at once. Preston swung into the saddle and then reached down to help her up behind him. She hesitated for a long moment before taking his hand, her fingers small and cold in his calloused palm. He pulled her up easily, settling her sideways on the horse's rump, and felt her stiffen as she tried to avoid touching him more than necessary. "You will need to hold on," he said over his shoulder. "The trail can be rough in places." Tentatively, she placed her hands on his waist, her grip light and uncertain. Preston nudged his horse into a steady walk, heading north out of town toward the open prairie that stretched endlessly under the vast Dakota sky. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the steady clip of hooves and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. Preston was acutely aware of the woman behind him, of her careful breathing and the way she held herself so rigidly. Finally, to ease the tension, he began to talk about the land they were crossing, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch he had built. "I came here in '76 after my time in the cavalry ended," he explained. "Started with 50 head of cattle and a lot of determination. Now I have close to 300 head and enough land to support them through the winter if we are careful with the grazing." "That sounds like quite an accomplishment," Sophia said softly. "To build something from nothing. It has been hard work, but honest work." Preston guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "Mrs. O'Brien came with me from Fort Lincoln when her husband died. She was the company cook and had nowhere else to go. We have been managing the ranch together since the beginning, though lately her joints pain her something fierce in the cold months. I am a good cook, Sophia offered hesitantly. My mother taught me before she died. And I know how to keep house, mend clothes, preserve food. Then you will be a blessing to us both. Preston meant it sincerely. The cabin is not fancy, but it is solid and warm. You will have your own room, and Mrs. O'Brien will be glad for the company. Sophia was quiet for a moment, then said in a voice thick with emotion, Mr. Gallagher, I need you to know the truth before we go any further. I came west to marry a man who turned out to be a liar and a thief. He left me stranded with no money and no way to return home. And I am carrying his child. Preston felt her words settle over him like a weight, understanding now the desperation he had seen in her eyes. He did not respond immediately, taking time to consider his words carefully. The horse continued its steady pace while above them a hawk circled lazily in the blue expanse of sky. Does he know about the child? Preston asked finally. No, I only became certain after he left. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a flat statement of facts. I have no family back east. My father died when I was 16, my mother 2 years later. I worked as a governess until I met Charles. I thought he was offering me a future, but I was just a fool. You were not a fool. You trusted someone who did not deserve it. That speaks to your character, not a lack of it. Preston turned his head slightly so she could hear him clearly. If you want the work, it is yours. What happened before does not concern me. People will talk, Sophia said. When they realize about the baby, it will reflect badly on you. Let them talk. I stopped caring what most people thought a long time ago. He paused. Mrs. O'Brien will be a good support to you. She has delivered half the babies in this county, including helping when the doctor cannot get there in time. Sophia's hands tightened slightly on his waist, and he thought he heard her make a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or something in between. I do not understand why you are being so kind to me. Maybe because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most, Preston said quietly. Or maybe because it is the right thing to do. Does the reason matter so much? It matters when you are used to people having conditions attached to their kindness. Preston understood what she was implying and felt anger kindle in his chest toward the man who had put that wariness in her voice. There are no conditions. You work. I pay you fair wages. You have a safe place to live. That is the whole arrangement. They continued on, the sun moving lower toward the horizon and painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Preston pointed out the boundaries of his land, the creek that ran through the eastern pasture, the stand of cottonwoods that provided shade for the cattle in summer. Sophia gradually relaxed against him, her grip less tentative, and he found himself noticing details he had not at first. The way her hair smelled faintly of lavender despite her hard travels, the delicate bones of her wrists, the quiet strength in her voice when she asked questions about the ranch. The cabin came into view as they crested a low rise, a solid structure of logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced south. There was a barn and several outbuildings, corrals holding horses, and in the distance, cattle dotting the grassland like dark stones. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that Mrs. O'Brien was preparing the evening meal. Preston helped Sophia down from the horse and carried her carpet bag toward the cabin. The door opened before they reached it, and Mrs. O'Brien stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that took in the situation immediately. Preston Gallagher, what have you brought home now? Her Irish accent was still thick despite decades in America. This is Miss Sophia Zimmerman. She's going to help you around the house. Preston met Mrs. O'Brien's eyes steadily, communicating something silently that the older woman seemed to understand. Mrs. O'Brien's expression softened. Is that so? Well, come in then, child. You look like you have had a hard day of it." Sophia climbed the porch steps slowly, as though afraid this kindness might evaporate if she moved too quickly. "Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. I promise I will work hard and earn my keep. We will worry about that tomorrow. Tonight you need a hot meal and a good rest, Mrs. O'Brien ushered her inside while Preston tended to his horse, unsaddling the gelding and brushing him down with methodical care that gave him time to think about what he had just done. He had always been a man who considered his actions carefully, who did not act on impulse or emotion. Yet today he had brought a stranger to his home, a pregnant woman with no prospects and a story that would cause scandal if it became common knowledge. He should have left her in town, let her find her own way, protected himself from potential trouble. Instead, something about the defeated slope of her shoulders and the pride she fought to maintain had called to something deep inside him that he thought he had buried long ago. When he entered the cabin, he found Sophia sitting at the kitchen table while Mrs. O'Brien bustled around preparing plates of stew and fresh bread. The interior was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture Preston had built himself and colorful rag rugs that Mrs. O'Brien had woven during long winter evenings. A fire crackled in the hearth, chasing away the chill that came with Dakota nights even in early autumn. "Sit yourself down, Preston," Mrs. O'Brien ordered. "Everything is ready." They ate together, Mrs. O'Brien keeping up a steady stream of talk about the day's events on the ranch, the chickens that were laying well, the fence that needed mending in the south pasture. Sophia ate slowly, as though her stomach was uncertain about accepting food, but she managed to finish most of what was on her plate. After dinner, Mrs. O'Brien showed Sophia to a small room off the kitchen that had been used for storage. Together they cleared it out, and Preston brought in a bed frame from the barn that he had built years ago but never used. They made it up with clean linens and the blanket he had purchased in town, and by the time the moon was rising, Sophia had a private space of her own. Preston stood in the doorway while Mrs. O'Brien fussed with the curtains. "If you need anything during the night, Mrs. O'Brien's room is just across the hall. Mine is upstairs." Sophia looked around the small room with an expression of wonder, as though she could not quite believe it was real. "Mr. Gallagher, I do not know how to thank you. No need for thanks. Just rest tonight, and we will figure out the work arrangements tomorrow." He nodded to both women and headed upstairs to his own room, suddenly exhausted from the weight of the day. As he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling and the distant howl of coyotes on the prairie, Preston wondered what he had gotten himself into. He was not a man who sought out complications, yet he had invited one directly into his home. Still, when he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia's face as she looked at her new room, the gratitude and relief shining through her tears, and he knew he could not have made a different choice. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Preston with its naturalness. Sophia proved to be everything she had claimed and more, rising before dawn to help Mrs. O'Brien with breakfast, throwing herself into the endless tasks of running a household on a working ranch. She learned quickly how to manage the cast iron stove, how to preserve the vegetables from the garden before the first frost, how to bake bread that came out light and golden instead of heavy and burnt. Mrs. O'Brien took to her immediately, and Preston often heard the two women talking and laughing as they worked together. The older woman seemed to have adopted Sophia as the daughter she had never had, teaching her the skills she would need to survive in this harsh land, while offering the kind of maternal comfort that Sophia had been missing since her own mother's death. Preston found himself making excuses to come to the house more often during the day, ostensibly to check on supplies or grab a quick meal, but really just to see how Sophia was settling in. He noticed small changes in her as the days passed. The way color returned to her cheeks, how her shoulders no longer hunched defensively. The rare smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. She was careful around him, always proper and respectful, but he sensed her watching him when she thought he was not paying attention. He tried not to think about what that might mean, reminding himself that she was under his protection and depending on his goodwill. To pursue any kind of attraction would be an abuse of the power dynamic between them. Still, he could not help noticing things. The way she hummed softly while kneading bread, the gentle competence with which she handled the chickens and the milk cow, the intelligence in her questions when he talked about the ranch. She was not just beautiful, she was interesting, and Preston found himself wanting to know everything about her. What books she had read, what she thought about the vast prairie sky, what dreams she had harbored before they were stolen by a scoundrel who did not deserve her. One evening in early October, Preston came in from checking the cattle to find the house filled with the rich scent of baking pie. Sophia was at the stove, her face flushed from the heat, and Mrs. O'Brien was sitting at the table snapping green beans. "Wash up, Preston," Mrs. O'Brien called. "Dinner will be ready soon, and Sophia has made her first attempt at apple pie." He washed his hands at the basin and then lingered in the kitchen doorway, watching Sophia carefully pull the pie from the oven. She set it on the windowsill to cool and then turned to find him watching her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some current of understanding or recognition that made Preston's heart beat faster. "It smells wonderful," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "I hope it tastes as good as your mother's recipe promised, Mrs. O'Brien," Sophia replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear in a gesture that Preston was coming to recognize as a sign of nervousness. They sat down to dinner together, as had become their custom, passing dishes and talking about the day. Preston mentioned that he would need to take the wagon into town the next day to pick up lumber for a new chicken coop, and Sophia surprised him by asking if she could come along. "I should buy fabric to make proper work dresses," she explained. "Mrs. O'Brien has been kind enough to lend me clothes, but I cannot keep imposing on her generosity." "You have wages coming," Preston said. "You have more than earned them in the work you have done. And yes, you are welcome to come to town if you like, Mrs. O'Brien gave him a knowing look across the table but said nothing, just smiled to herself as she served the pie. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with frost sparkling on the grass. Preston hitched the 2 draft horses to the wagon while Sophia changed into her better dress and pinned her hair up carefully. When she climbed onto the wagon seat beside him, he noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. "Are you nervous about going to town?" he asked as he clicked the horses into motion. "People will ask questions about who I am and why I am living at your ranch," Sophia said quietly. "I do not want to cause you trouble. You are my housekeeper. That is all anyone needs to know." Preston kept his eyes on the road ahead. "But Sophia, you understand that eventually people will notice about the baby. In a town this size, nothing stays secret for long." She was silent for a moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I know. I have been trying not to think about it, but I know. When the time comes, we will figure something out. Mrs. O'Brien and I will stand by you." He glanced at her. "You are not alone in this. I feel like I have been alone for so long that I forgot what it was like to have someone care," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "You and Mrs. O'Brien have been so kind, and I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to tell me there are conditions or expectations." Preston pulled the wagon to a stop on the empty road and turned to face her fully. "Look at me, Sophia." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued with quiet intensity. I am not Charles Whitmore or anyone else who has hurt you. When I make a promise, I keep it. When I offer help, there are no strings attached. You can trust that." Tears spilled down her cheeks and she tried to wipe them away with her sleeve. "I want to believe that. I do. But I am so scared, Preston. What if you change your mind? What if I become too much of a burden? What if—" Her voice broke on a sob. Preston did something he had never done before, something he knew might change everything between them. He reached out and pulled her gently into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder while he held her with a tenderness that surprised him. She felt small and fragile in his embrace, though he knew she had a core of steel to have survived everything she had been through. "Let it out," he murmured into her hair. "You have been holding this inside for too long." She cried for several minutes, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Preston just held her, one hand stroking her back in slow circles, letting her release all the fear and pain and uncertainty she had been carrying. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I will never be enough," she sobbed, the words torn from somewhere raw and wounded inside her. "I will never be respectable again. I will never be able to give you anything but trouble and shame. I am ruined, Preston, and no amount of kindness can change that." Preston reached up and gently wiped her tears with his calloused thumbs, cradling her face in his hands. His storm-gray eyes held hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Sophia, listen to me. You are more than I deserve. You are brave and strong and good, and what happened to you does not define your worth. Do you understand me? You are not ruined. You are not shameful. You are a woman who was lied to and hurt, and that is on him, not you." She stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language, as though she could not quite process what he was saying. "How can you say that? You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you work hard without complaining. I know you treat Mrs. O'Brien with kindness and respect. I know you have faced impossible circumstances with more grace and dignity than most people could manage." His voice softened. "And I know that every day I find another reason to be grateful that I saw you standing on that train platform. Preston." Her voice was barely a whisper. He released her face and picked up the reins again, needing to do something with his hands before he did something foolish like kiss her. "We should get to town before the store gets crowded." They continued the journey in charged silence, both of them processing what had just happened. Preston could still feel the warmth of her body against his, could still smell the lavender in her hair. He had crossed a line, he knew, had revealed more of his feelings than was wise. But he could not regret it, not when he had seen the way his words had broken through some of her despair. Bismarck was busy with its usual commerce when they arrived. Wagons and riders filling the streets, people going about their daily business. Preston helped Sophia down from the wagon, and they walked together to the general store, his hand resting lightly on her elbow in a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. Inside, Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter while her husband restocked shelves. She looked up with interest when they entered. "Preston Gallagher, and who is this lovely young lady?" "This is Miss Zimmerman, my new housekeeper. She needs fabric for work dresses and anything else she might require." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sharpened with curiosity, but she kept her tone pleasant. "Of course. We have some lovely cotton that would wear well and some wool for when the weather turns colder." Sophia moved toward the fabric section while Preston pretended to examine the tools, though he was actually watching her in the reflection of a glass case. She touched the fabrics carefully, checking quality and price, making practical choices rather than selecting the prettier but more delicate materials. It told him something about her character, the way she prioritized durability over beauty. "That is quite a beauty you have taken on at your ranch," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, coming to stand beside Preston. "Where is she from?" "East. She needed work and I needed help." Preston kept his voice casual. "Mrs. O'Brien's arthritis has been troubling her more this year." "I see, Mrs." Patterson did not sound entirely convinced, but she was too polite to push further. "Well, she seems like a nice girl. I hope it works out." When Sophia had selected her fabric, along with thread and buttons, Preston paid for everything and they moved on to the lumber yard. He was loading planks into the wagon when he heard a familiar voice call his name. "Preston Gallagher, I heard you were in town." He turned to see Sheriff Tom Wheeler approaching, a man he had known since his cavalry days. They shook hands warmly. "Tom, how are things?" "Busy as always. We had some trouble with cattle rustlers up north last week, but we caught them before they made it to the border." Tom's eyes drifted to where Sophia was waiting by the wagon. "I heard you hired a housekeeper. That the young lady, Sophia Zimmerman. She is helping Mrs. O'Brien around the ranch." Preston kept his tone neutral, but something in his stance must have communicated protectiveness, because Tom's expression shifted slightly. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Tom tipped his hat to Sophia as they passed. "Miss." They finished their errands and started the journey back to the ranch. Sophia was quiet, staring out at the prairie with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked. "That woman in the store, Mrs. Patterson. She was trying to figure out who I am and why I am really at your ranch." Sophia turned to look at him. I could see it in her eyes. People are curious by nature. It does not mean anything. It means they will talk, and when my condition becomes obvious, they will talk even more. She folded her hands over her still flat stomach. "I am going to ruin your reputation, Preston. My reputation will survive, and anyone who wants to judge you will have to answer to me." He said it firmly, leaving no room for argument. Sophia smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen from her all day. "You are a good man, Preston Gallagher, better than I thought existed." "I am just a man, Sophia, nothing more and nothing less." But as they drove home through the golden afternoon light, Preston knew he was lying to himself. His feelings for Sophia were growing deeper every day, moving beyond simple compassion into something that felt dangerous and exhilarating at the same time. He was falling for her, this wounded woman with her proud spirit and hidden strengths, and he had no idea what to do about it. The days grew shorter as October gave way to November, and the work of preparing the ranch for winter consumed everyone's time. Preston and his two hired hands, young men named Billy and Sam, brought the cattle closer to the home pastures, repaired fences, and stocked the barn with hay. Sophia and Mrs. O'Brien preserved the last of the garden vegetables, made candles, and prepared the house for the long, cold months ahead. One evening after dinner, Preston was in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal when Sophia appeared in the doorway. She had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the chill, and in the lantern light she looked almost ethereal. "Mrs. O'Brien said I would find you here," she said. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Preston straightened from examining the mare's legs. "Is everything all right?" "Yes." "Well, no, I am not sure." She came into the barn, closing the door behind her to keep out the cold wind. "Preston, I need to know something honestly. Do you regret bringing me to your ranch?" "No." "Why would you think that?" "Because I am starting to show." She placed a hand over her stomach, which had begun to curve noticeably under her dresses. "In another month, maybe two, everyone who sees me will know, and they will assume things about you." Preston left the mare's stall and walked toward Sophia, stopping a few feet away. "Let them assume whatever they want. The truth is between you and me and God, and that is all that matters. But what if there was a way to protect you, to make this respectable?" She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the lantern light. "What if we married?" Preston felt as though he had been kicked by one of his horses. "Sophia, before you say no, just listen. It would solve everything. The baby would have a name. You would not have people gossiping about why you are housing an unmarried pregnant woman, and I would have security. It would be a practical arrangement, nothing more." She spoke quickly, as though afraid she would lose her nerve. "I would not expect anything from you. We could maintain separate rooms, live as we do now, just legally married for appearances." Preston wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but not like this, not as a practical arrangement to save reputations. "Sophia, I cannot marry you for those reasons." Her face fell, and she nodded quickly. "I understand. I am sorry for presuming. Let me finish." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I cannot marry you as a practical arrangement because my feelings for you are anything but practical. I have been falling in love with you since the day I found you on that train platform, and if we marry, I want it to be real. I want it to be because you feel the same way, not because you are trying to protect me or secure your future." Sophia's eyes widened, her breath catching. "You love me." "I do. I know I should not, that it complicates everything, but I cannot help it. You are in my thoughts every moment of every day. When I work, I am thinking about coming back to see you. When I lie in bed at night, I am imagining what it would be like to hold you beside me. You have gotten under my skin, Sophia Zimmerman, and I do not want you out." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "But I will not take advantage of your circumstances. If you marry me, it will be because you want me, not because you need me." Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling through them. "You foolish man. I have been in love with you for weeks. I just thought you could never feel the same way about someone like me, someone damaged and carrying another man's child." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "You are not damaged. And as for the child, if you will have me, I will raise him or her as my own. I will be the father in every way that matters." She pulled back to look up at him. "You mean that? You would claim this baby as yours?" "I would be honored to. Any child of yours is a blessing, regardless of how he or she came into this world." He cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me, Sophia. Not for respectability or practical reasons, but because we love each other and want to build a life together." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Preston kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened as weeks of restrained longing broke free. She tasted like the apple pie she had made for dessert, sweet and warm, and she fit perfectly in his arms as though she had been made to be there. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. "We should tell Mrs. O'Brien," Sophia said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "She will be so happy." They walked hand in hand back to the house, finding Mrs. O'Brien in her rocking chair by the fire, mending one of Preston's shirts. She looked up when they entered, took in their clasped hands and glowing faces, and smiled broadly. "About time you two figured it out," she said with satisfaction. "I have been waiting weeks for this." "You knew?" Sophia asked in surprise. "Child, I have been watching Preston moon over you since the day he brought you home. And you have been no better, sneaking glances at him when you thought no one was looking." Mrs. O'Brien set down her mending. "So when is the wedding?" "As soon as we can arrange it," Preston said. "I see no reason to wait. Pastor Miller can perform the ceremony on Sunday after church services if you like," Mrs. O'Brien suggested. "That gives us a few days to prepare." They agreed, and the next days passed in a flurry of activity. Sophia used some of the fabric she had purchased in town to sew a simple but pretty dress in a soft blue color that brought out her eyes. Mrs. O'Brien baked a special cake and prepared a feast for a small celebration after the ceremony. Preston rode into town to speak with Pastor Miller and to file the necessary paperwork. On Saturday evening, as Sophia was finishing the last stitches on her dress, Mrs. O'Brien came to sit beside her. "I want you to have something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a delicate gold locket. "This was my mother's, passed down to me when she died. I never had a daughter to give it to, but I would be honored if you would wear it tomorrow." Sophia took the locket with trembling hands, tears filling her eyes. "Mrs. O'Brien, I cannot accept something so precious." "You can and you will." "You are the daughter of my heart, Sophia, and I could not be happier to see you marrying a good man like Preston." She fastened the locket around Sophia's neck. "You deserve every happiness, child. Do not let the past steal your joy in tomorrow." That night, Sophia lay in her bed unable to sleep, her mind spinning with the reality of what was about to happen. In less than 12 hours, she would be Mrs. Preston Gallagher. She would have a husband, a home, a family. After months of despair and uncertainty, she was being given a second chance at life, and it felt almost too good to be true. She thought about Preston, about the way he looked at her with such tenderness and desire, about the strength in his arms and the gentleness in his touch. She had never imagined she could feel this way about someone, this deep certainty that they belonged together. Charles had swept her off her feet with pretty words and false promises, but Preston had won her heart with quiet actions and honest declarations. Morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky seemed impossibly blue and the air sharp enough to cut. Sophia dressed carefully in her new gown, pinned her hair up with Mrs. O'Brien's help, and fastened the locket around her neck. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Eyes bright with happiness, cheeks flushed with excitement, no trace of the desperate girl who had arrived in Bismarck just 2 months before. Preston came to collect them in the wagon, looking handsome in his best suit with his hair combed back and his beard neatly trimmed. When he saw Sophia, he stopped mid-stride, his expression one of pure wonder. "You are beautiful," he breathed. "You look very handsome yourself," Sophia replied, feeling suddenly shy. The short journey to the church passed in comfortable silence, the three of them content to simply be together. When they arrived, a small group of people had gathered. Pastor Miller and his wife, Sheriff Wheeler, who had agreed to stand as witness, a few of Preston's neighbors who had heard about the wedding. Mrs. Patterson was there too, looking curious and perhaps a bit judgmental, but Sophia refused to let it bother her. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Pastor Miller spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about commitment and love and the building of a life together. When it came time for the vows, Preston took Sophia's hands and spoke with a sincerity that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I, Preston Gallagher, take you, Sophia Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be a good husband and a good father, to work hard to provide for our family, and to never let you doubt how much you mean to me." Sophia's voice shook as she repeated her own vows, but she held Preston's gaze steadily. "I, Sophia Zimmerman, take you, Preston Gallagher, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be a good wife and partner, to make our house a home, and to be grateful every day for the gift of your love." Pastor Miller pronounced them husband and wife, and Preston kissed her gently, sealing their commitment before God and witnesses. The small congregation clapped, and Mrs. O'Brien dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. They returned to the ranch for a celebratory meal. Mrs. O'Brien had outdone herself with roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables preserved from the summer garden, and her special cake. Sheriff Wheeler regaled them with stories from his deputy days, and the neighbors who had come shared advice and well wishes for the new couple. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving Preston and Sophia alone for the first time as husband and wife. Mrs. O'Brien had discreetly retired to her room, giving them privacy. They stood together on the porch, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Are you happy?" Preston asked softly, his arm around Sophia's waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "This morning I kept thinking I would wake up and discover it was all a dream. It is real. You are my wife now, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." He turned her to face him. "Sophia, I know we have not talked about tonight about expectations. I want you to know there is no pressure. We can take things as slowly as you need." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I do not want to wait, Preston. I want to be your wife in every way. I want to start our life together tonight." He searched her eyes, making sure she was certain, and then kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. When he lifted her in his arms and carried her into the house, she laughed with pure joy, and that laughter carried them through the threshold and up the stairs to his room, where they would begin their marriage in the most intimate way possible. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Sophia's life. She and Preston settled into their roles as husband and wife with an ease that surprised them both. They worked together during the day, shared meals with Mrs. O'Brien, and spent their evenings talking by the fire or in the privacy of their bedroom, where they continued to explore their growing intimacy. As winter deepened and snow began to fall across the prairie, Sophia's pregnancy became more obvious. She was just over 4 months along now, her body changing in ways that would have frightened her before, but now filled her with cautious optimism. Preston was attentive to her every need, insisting she not overwork herself, bringing her small gifts like a smooth river stone or a particularly pretty bird feather that he found on his rides. One snowy December evening, as they sat together by the fire with Preston reading aloud from a book while Sophia knitted baby clothes, he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "I have been thinking about the baby," he said. Sophia looked up. "What about the baby?" "When he or she is born, I want to give the child my name from the start. I want everyone to know that I am the father in every way that matters." He set the book aside. "I know you might want to explain someday about the circumstances of the child's conception, and if so, we will handle that with honesty and age-appropriate care. But to the world, this is our child. Do you agree?" Sophia felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Yes, I agree completely." "This baby is already yours, Preston. You have given us both a gift I can never fully repay." "You do not need to repay anything. You have given me a purpose and a family. That is more than I ever expected to have." He pulled her close, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "Have you thought about names?" They spent the evening discussing possibilities, laughing over some suggestions and seriously considering others. It felt domestic and normal and perfect, and Sophia marveled at how far she had come from that desperate day on the train platform. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow that transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland. Preston and the hired hands ensured the cattle had enough feed and that the water troughs stayed clear of ice. Sophia and Mrs. O'Brien spent days preparing a special feast, baking cookies and bread, roasting a goose that one of the neighbors had given them. On Christmas morning, Sophia woke to find a carved wooden cradle beside the bed. Preston was sitting in a chair watching her with a soft smile. "Merry Christmas, wife," he said. She sat up, staring at the beautiful cradle with its smooth lines and sturdy construction. "Preston, did you make this?" I have been working on it in the barn when you were busy with other things. I wanted it to be a surprise." He came to sit beside her on the bed. "Do you like it?" "I love it. It is perfect." She ran her hand over the polished wood. "Our baby will sleep in this, our baby, yes. The first of many if we are blessed." He kissed her forehead. "I have one more gift for you." He handed her a small box, and when she opened it, she found a delicate gold wedding band with a tiny emerald set in it. "Preston, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you. The emerald reminded me of your eyes." He slipped it onto her finger, next to the simple band he had given her at their wedding. "I love you, Sophia, more than I thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," she whispered, pulling him down for a kiss. They spent a perfect Christmas day together, the three of them sharing the feast Mrs. O'Brien had prepared, exchanging simple gifts, singing carols by the fire. Later that evening, as Preston and Sophia lay in bed with his hand resting on her belly, they felt the baby kick for the first time. "Did you feel that?" Sophia asked in wonder. "I did." Preston's voice was thick with emotion. "That is our child, Sophia, our little one saying hello." She placed her hand over his, and they lay there in the darkness feeling the tiny movements, connected to each other, and to the new life they had created together through love if not through blood. Winter passed slowly, with blizzards that sometimes kept them housebound for days and cold so intense that Preston worried constantly about the cattle. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and laughter and love. Sophia continued to prepare for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, reading books about infant care that Mrs. O'Brien had procured from town. Preston added a rocking chair to their bedroom and ensured the cradle was positioned perfectly beside their bed. In early March, as the first signs of spring began to appear with the snow melting in patches and the days growing incrementally longer, Sophia's labor began. She woke Preston in the middle of the night with a gasp of pain, her hand clutching her belly. "The baby is coming," she said, her voice tight with fear and excitement. Preston leaped out of bed and called for Mrs. O'Brien, who appeared within minutes fully dressed as though she had been expecting this. While Preston paced anxiously, Mrs. O'Brien helped Sophia through the long hours of labor, offering encouragement and expertise gained from decades of attending births. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally arrived, a lusty cry filling the room. Mrs. O'Brien cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sophia's arms. "You have a son," she said with a tired but joyful smile. Preston approached the bed cautiously, staring down at the tiny red-faced baby in wonder. "He is perfect." "He has your eyes," Sophia said, though they both knew that was impossible given the baby's true parentage. But as they looked at their son, they saw only their family, their love made manifest in this new life. "What should we name him?" Preston asked, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Immediately, the infant's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "I was thinking Thomas after your father," Sophia suggested, "if that would honor his memory." Preston felt tears prick his eyes. His father had died when he was young, but he had been a good man who taught Preston about honor and hard work. "Thomas Preston Gallagher, I like that." They spent the next hours simply marveling at their son, taking turns holding him, learning his features and expressions. Mrs. O'Brien finally shooed Preston out so Sophia could rest, and he went to handle the morning chores in a daze of happiness. The weeks that followed were exhausting but wonderful. Thomas proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in decent stretches and nursing well. Sophia recovered quickly from the birth, her body resilient and her spirits high. Preston was a devoted father, often taking the baby from Sophia in the evenings so she could rest, walking the floor with Thomas on his shoulder when the child was fussy, talking to him in a low voice about the ranch and the horses and everything they would do together when the boy was older. Spring gave way to summer, and the ranch flourished under Preston's capable management. He hired another hand to help with the work, allowing him more time to spend with his family. Sophia bloomed in the warmth and sunshine, her body returning to its pre-pregnancy state, her confidence growing as she discovered her capabilities as a mother. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set while Thomas slept in his mother's arms, Preston said, "I never told you about why I left the cavalry." Sophia looked at him with interest. They had talked about many things during their marriage, but Preston rarely spoke about his military service. "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. I want you to know." He stared out at the prairie. "I saw a lot of death during my years as a soldier. Good men dying for causes that sometimes seemed pointless. After a particularly brutal battle, I realized I was becoming numb to it all, that I was losing the part of myself that could feel compassion. So I left. I came here to build something instead of destroying things, to create life instead of taking it." "And you have," Sophia said softly. "Look at what you have built. This ranch, this family. You have given life not just to Thomas and me, but to Mrs. O'Brien, to your hired hands who depend on the work you provide. You are exactly the man you wanted to become." Preston reached for her free hand, lacing their fingers together. "I could not have done it without you. You brought meaning to all of this. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. Now I am truly living." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, their son sleeping peacefully, their future stretching out before them bright with possibility. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing its own challenges and joys. When Thomas was 2, Sophia became pregnant again. This time there was no fear or uncertainty, only excitement as they prepared to welcome a second child. In the spring of 1885, their daughter was born, a beautiful girl with Preston's dark hair and Sophia's green eyes. They named her Grace Marie Gallagher, and she completed their family in ways they had not known they needed. The ranch continued to prosper. Preston expanded his herd, purchased more land, and built a new barn to accommodate the growth. Sophia managed the household with capable efficiency, raising their children with a firm but loving hand, hosting dinners for neighbors, and becoming known throughout the county as a gracious hostess and a devoted mother. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, showing an instinctive understanding of animals and the land. Grace was her mother's shadow, helping in the kitchen and garden, learning to sew and cook, but also showing a fierce independence that made both parents laugh with delight. Mrs. O'Brien remained with them, her age slowing her down but her spirit as sharp as ever. She doted on the children, telling them stories of Ireland and teaching them songs in Gaelic, serving as the beloved grandmother neither Preston nor Sophia had been able to give them otherwise. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston took Sophia on a trip to Fargo, leaving the children in Mrs. O'Brien's capable care. It was the first time they had been alone together since Thomas was born, and they relished the freedom to focus solely on each other. As they walked along the Red River on a warm summer evening, Sophia said, "Do you ever think about that day at the train station? About how different our lives could have been?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had ridden past without stopping, where you would have ended up where I would be now. Do you ever regret your choice?" She looked up at him, the setting sun painting her face in shades of gold. "Never. Not for 1 second." He pulled her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophia. You and our children have given my life meaning and purpose beyond anything I could have built on my own." "I feel the same way. You saved me, Preston, not just from desperate circumstances, but from a life of bitterness and regret. You showed me that I was worthy of love, that I could trust again, that I deserved happiness." She stood on her toes to kiss him. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you saw me that day. I will spend the rest of mine being grateful that you said yes when I asked you to marry me." He kissed her more deeply, not caring that they were in public, wanting the whole world to know how much he loved his wife. They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to throw themselves back into the beautiful chaos of family life. The children had grown noticeably in just the few days they had been gone, or perhaps Preston and Sophia simply noticed it more after having time away. As the years continued to pass, the Gallagher Ranch became known as one of the most successful in the territory. Preston's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and he began to serve as an informal advisor to other ranchers in the region. Sophia became active in the church, organizing charitable efforts to help new families settling in the area, never forgetting what it felt like to arrive as a stranger in need. When Thomas turned 10, Sophia finally told him the truth about his conception. She had discussed it extensively with Preston, wanting to be honest but age-appropriate, not wanting their son to discover the truth from cruel gossip as he grew older. They sat together in the parlor one evening after Grace had gone to bed, and Sophia carefully explained that Preston was not his biological father, but had chosen to be his father in every way that truly mattered. Thomas listened quietly, his young face serious. When Sophia finished, he looked between his parents for a long moment before turning to Preston. "So you married Mama even though she was going to have a baby that was not yours?" "I married your mother because I loved her," Preston said firmly. "And the moment I saw you, you became my son. Nothing will ever change that. But my real father did not want me. Your biological father made a terrible mistake, but that was his failing, not yours. You are wanted, Thomas. You are loved, and I am proud every single day to be your father." Thomas thought about this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, can I still call you Papa?" "I would be heartbroken if you called me anything else," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. Thomas came to hug both his parents, and they held him tightly, grateful that the conversation had gone as well as it had. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Sophia said, "Thank you for loving him the way you do. Thank you for making sure he never felt like anything less than your true son." "He is my true son," Preston replied. "Blood does not make a family. Love does." More years passed, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Mrs. O'Brien passed away peacefully in her sleep one winter night at the age of 78. The entire family mourned her loss, but they were comforted by the knowledge that she had lived a full life surrounded by people who loved her. They buried her in the small cemetery outside Bismarck, under a cottonwood tree she had always loved, and Preston carved a beautiful headstone that read, "Margaret O'Brien, beloved friend and family." As Thomas and Grace grew into young adults, they showed no interest in leaving the ranch that had been their entire world. Thomas took on more responsibility for the cattle operation, proving himself to be a natural leader with his father's steady temperament and his mother's compassion. Grace surprised everyone by showing a talent for horse breeding, developing an eye for bloodlines and conformation that brought buyers from as far away as Montana. Preston and Sophia watched their children flourish with pride and satisfaction, knowing they had raised them well. On quiet evenings, They would sit together on the porch that Preston had expanded over the years, watching the sun set over land that had become as much a part of them as breathing. "We built something good here," Sophia said one such evening, her hand in Preston's. They were both in their early 50s now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces that spoke of years lived fully. "We did. Though I give you most of the credit." Preston squeezed her hand. "You took a rough bachelor rancher and turned him into a husband and father. You were always those things. You just needed the right people to bring it out of you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that day on the road to town, when I was crying about not being enough? I told you that you were more than I deserved. And I meant it then, and I mean it now. I know you did. And do you know what I have learned in all these years we have been together?" She turned to look at him. "That love is not about deserving or being enough. It is about choosing each other every day, about building something together brick by brick, season by season. It is about being partners in all things." Preston pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "When I married a man who showed me what real love looks like." She smiled up at him. "And who gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounded them, Preston and Sophia sat together in the peace that comes from a life well lived and a love that had weathered every storm. They had built more than a successful ranch over the years. They had built a family, a legacy, a testament to the power of compassion and second chances. Thomas eventually married a kind young woman from town, bringing her to live at the ranch and adding another generation to the Gallagher family. Grace found love with a rancher from the neighboring property, combining their lands and creating an even more prosperous operation. Preston and Sophia became grandparents, delighting in the babies that filled their home with noise and laughter. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Thomas made a toast, raising his glass to his parents. "To the two people who taught me what it means to be truly loved, who showed me that family is built on commitment and compassion, not just blood, who created a home that everyone wants to return to. Thank you for everything you have given us." Grace added her own tribute. "To Mama and Papa, who prove every day that the best love stories are not the ones that start perfectly, but the ones where two people choose to build something beautiful together despite the obstacles. We are all blessed to be your children." Preston and Sophia looked around at their family, at the children and grandchildren who filled the house they had built together, at the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. It had been a quarter century since that September day when a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy had first crossed paths, and every day since had been a gift. "Thank you all for being here," Sophia said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I arrived in Bismarck all those years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to offer the world, but Preston saw something in me that I could not see in myself. He gave me a chance when I had no right to expect one, and in doing so, he gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Preston interjected. "You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. You gave me children to raise and love. You gave me a partner who makes everything better. You gave me a life worth living." They kissed to the cheers and applause of their family, and the celebration continued late into the night with music and dancing, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. As Preston and Sophia finally retired to their bedroom in the early hours of the morning, exhausted but happy, they held each other close. "We did good, didn't we?" Sophia murmured sleepily. "We did better than good. We built something that will last long after we are gone." Preston kissed her forehead. Our children, our grandchildren, they will carry forward what we started. The values we taught them, the love we showed them, it will ripple out through generations. I love you, Preston Gallagher, more today than the day I married you, if that is possible. It is possible, because I feel the same way. Every year with you is better than the last. He pulled her closer, and they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, just as they had done for 25 years and would continue to do for all the years they had left. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Gallagher ranch continued to thrive. Preston and Sophia grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. They faced the challenges that come with age, with health issues and the loss of friends, but they faced everything together with the same partnership that had seen them through all the earlier trials. When Preston turned 60, he began to gradually turn over more of the ranch operations to Thomas, though he never fully retired. He was still happiest when working with the cattle and horses, still found peace in the vast expanse of prairie that had been his home for so many decades. Sophia remained active in the community, now considered one of the matriarchs of Bismarck society. She used her influence to advocate for better schools and support for families in need, never forgetting her own desperate beginning in this place. Young women who found themselves in difficult circumstances often found their way to the Gallagher Ranch, where Sophia offered advice, assistance, and sometimes employment, paying forward the kindness that had saved her own life. One summer evening, when they were both in their mid-60s, Preston and Sophia took a ride out to the far pasture where he had first brought her all those years ago. They sat on a blanket watching the sunset, their bodies not as spry as they once were, but their spirits still young. "Do you remember the first time we came out here?" Preston asked. "You were so scared and trying so hard to be brave. I remember everything about those early days, how terrified I was that you would change your mind and send me away, how shocked I was when you defended me to people in town, how completely amazed I was when you said you loved me." Sophia leaned against him. "You changed the entire trajectory of my life, Preston. We changed each other's trajectories. Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something that would outlast me." He wrapped his arm around her. "If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here. Even the bad moments that brought me to Bismarck in the first place. Even those, because they brought you to me, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He turned her face toward his and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. And you are still the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known." She kissed him back, and they sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through time. The years continued their march forward. Preston and Sophia celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They welcomed more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, their family tree spreading wide and strong. The ranch passed fully into Thomas's capable hands, with Grace managing the horse breeding operation that had become renowned throughout the territory. When Preston was 70, he finally admitted that the years of hard physical labor were catching up with him. His joints ached in the mornings, and he no longer had the stamina to work from dawn to dusk. But he remained active, still riding out to check the cattle most days, still offering advice when asked, still finding joy in the work that had defined his adult life. Sophia, at 67, remained sharp and engaged with life. She had taken up painting in her later years, creating beautiful landscapes of the prairie she loved. She also wrote down the story of her life, wanting her descendants to know the truth of where she had come from and how she had found her way to happiness. She wrote honestly about Charles Whitmore and the circumstances of Thomas's conception, but mostly she wrote about Preston and the extraordinary love they had shared. One quiet afternoon in late autumn, as they sat together in the parlor with a fire crackling in the hearth, Sophia read parts of her memoir to Preston. When she finished the section about their first meeting and subsequent courtship, she looked up to find tears in his eyes. "That is beautiful, Sophia. You have a gift with words. I just wrote the truth, that you saved me in every way a person can be saved, that you loved me when I thought I was unlovable, that you built a family with me when I had nothing to offer but myself." She set the pages aside. "I want our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know this story, to know that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that second chances are real, that kindness matters more than anything." Preston moved to sit beside her, taking her aged hands in his. The hands that had once been smooth were now marked by the years, spotted and veined, but still precious to him. "I want them to know too, but mostly I want them to know that I loved you from the moment I saw you until the moment I die, and probably beyond that, if such things are possible." "They are possible," Sophia said with certainty. "Love like ours does not end just because our bodies do. It continues on in the family we built, in the land we nurtured, in every act of kindness we showed to others. We will live on through all of that." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of family moving through the house around them. Thomas was in the kitchen helping his wife prepare dinner. Grace had stopped by with her children, and the house rang with youthful laughter. It was exactly the kind of full, vibrant life that neither Preston nor Sophia had dared to dream of in those early, uncertain days. As the years advanced into their 70s, Preston and Sophia slowed down considerably, but remained devoted to each other and engaged with their family. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a grand party that brought people from all over the territory. The church was filled with friends and family, with business associates and former employees, with people whose lives had been touched by the Gallaghers' generosity and kindness over the decades. During the celebration, Thomas stood to speak about his parents. He was now 50 years old himself, a successful rancher with grown children of his own, but his voice broke with emotion as he talked about the two people who had shaped his life. "My parents taught me that love is a choice you make every single day. That family is built on commitment and compassion, that who you are matters more than where you came from." He looked directly at Preston and Sophia. "Papa, you chose to be my father when you had no obligation to do so. You raised me as your own and never once made me feel like I was anything less than your true son. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." He turned to his mother. "And Mama, you showed me what strength looks like, how to face adversity with grace, how to love unconditionally, how to build a life from the ashes of what came before. You are my hero." There was not a dry eye in the church by the time Thomas finished speaking. Grace added her own tribute, and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren took turns sharing what Preston and Sophia meant to them. By the end, the couple was overwhelmed with the outpouring of love. "I never imagined we would have this," Sophia whispered to Preston as they danced together later, moving slowly to accommodate their aged bodies. "A family this big, this loving, a legacy this meaningful. We earned it through 50 years of showing up for each other every single day," Preston replied. "Through choosing love even when it was difficult, through never giving up on each other or on what we built together." As they swayed together on the dance floor, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, Preston and Sophia knew that their story had come full circle. They had started as two lost souls who found each other by chance, and they had built something extraordinary through intention and devotion. The final years of their life together were peaceful and content. They spent their days in quiet companionship, taking short walks around the ranch, sitting on the porch watching the world go by, entertaining visits from family members who came frequently to see them. Preston's health began to fail first, his heart growing weak from a lifetime of hard work. But he faced his declining health with the same steady courage he had shown in facing every other challenge. One spring morning, as the prairie was coming back to life after the long winter, Preston woke feeling particularly weak. Sophia helped him dress and brought him breakfast in bed, something she had rarely needed to do before. They both knew without speaking that something was different today. "Stay with me," Preston asked, patting the bed beside him. Sophia climbed carefully onto the bed and curled up next to her husband of 53 years. They lay together holding hands, watching the sunlight stream through the window and listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up around them. "I have had a good life," Preston said quietly. "Better than I ever expected or deserved." "Do not talk like that. You are not going anywhere yet." But Sophia's voice wavered because she could feel the truth in her bones. "Whenever I go, Sophia, I want you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did, that every day with you was a gift, that I have no regrets about any of it." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me you will not mourn too long, that you will keep living fully, keep being the amazing woman you are." "I promise," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But Preston, I do not know how to be in this world without you. You will figure it out just like you figured out everything else. You are strong, Sophia. You always have been." He turned his head to look at her, his storm-gray eyes still full of love despite his body's weakness. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every single day. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Thank you for giving me a family and a home and a life beyond my wildest dreams." She kissed him gently. "I love you, Preston Gallagher. I always have and I always will. And I love you, Sophia Gallagher, forever and always." Those were the last words he spoke. He closed his eyes with a small smile on his face and slipped away peacefully, Sophia holding his hand and whispering words of love. When Thomas came to check on them an hour later, he found his mother still curled beside his father, tears on her face but peace in her expression. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like half the territory came to pay their respects. Preston had been a pillar of the community for over 50 years, known for his integrity, his hard work, and his quiet generosity. But it was the love story that people talked about in hushed whispers, the tale of how a cowboy had rescued a desperate woman and built a legendary love affair that spanned 5 decades. Sophia missed Preston with an ache that sometimes felt unbearable, but she kept her promise to keep living. She continued to paint, to spend time with her family, to share her stories with anyone who would listen. She wanted people to know about the man who had changed her life, who had shown her what true love looked like. 2 years after Preston's death, on a cool autumn morning very much like the day they had first met, Sophia passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 80 years old and had lived a full, extraordinary life. Her family found the memoir she had written, carefully bound and left with instructions that it be shared with future generations. They buried her beside Preston in the cemetery outside Bismarck, under the same cottonwood tree where Mrs. O'Brien rested. The headstone Preston had commissioned years before for both of them read simply, "Preston and Sophia Gallagher, they built a life of love." The ranch continued on under Thomas's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and then to theirs. The Gallagher name became synonymous with quality cattle, excellent horses, and the kind of integrity that Preston had embodied. But more than the business success, what continued through the generations was the story of how it all began. Every child born into the Gallagher family eventually heard the tale of their great-great-grandmother Sophia, who arrived in Bismarck with nothing but a battered carpetbag and a broken heart, and their great-great-grandfather Preston, who saw past circumstances to the person beneath and offered not just help but love. They learned about second chances and redemption, about choosing kindness over judgment, about building something beautiful from the ruins of what came before. The memoir Sophia had written became a treasured family heirloom, passed down and read at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder of where they came from and what values they were meant to uphold. In it, Sophia had written about that pivotal moment on the road to the ranch when Preston had wiped her tears and told her she was more than he deserved. In that moment, she had written, I began to understand that my worth was not determined by my circumstances or by what had been done to me. Preston saw value in me when I could not see it in myself, and in doing so, he taught me to love myself again. That is the greatest gift one person can give another, the belief that they are worthy of good things. She had concluded her memoir with these words, If you are reading this, you are part of the legacy that Preston and I built together. You carry within you the strength of a man who chose honor over convenience and the resilience of a woman who refused to let her past define her future. Remember that love is the most powerful force in the world, that kindness costs nothing but returns everything, and that second chances are real if you are brave enough to take them. Live fully, love deeply, build something beautiful. That is what Preston and I did, and it made all the difference. And so the story of Preston and Sophia Gallagher lived on, passed from generation to generation, a testament to the transformative power of love and the extraordinary things that can grow from a single moment of compassion on a dusty train platform in Bismarck, North Dakota, in 1882. Their love story, which began with tears and whispered promises, created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives, touching countless others, and proving that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the most desperate circumstances, and that true love really can heal even the deepest wounds and build something that lasts forever.